from the presence of the Lord and went down to Joppa. And he found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare thereof and went down into it to go with them unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So today I'm going to begin my three-part message on the unwilling evangelist. The unwilling evangelist. Before we begin, I would just like to open with a word of prayer. Most gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, as we come together for this series this morning, I pray that you will be here. Let your words be spoken through me, Lord. I want your word to be spoken. Put me to the side. Let me not be seen or heard, but let your words be the ones that are heard today. I pray these in Jesus' name. Amen. So before I begin this series, I need to kind of lay out what we're going to do here today. It's going to be a little bit different than a normal series. When somebody comes in and speaking about evangelism, we have a certain pattern that we follow. Well, this one is going to be different. And you'll see as we go along, think, wow, this is different. It's kind of like math. Maybe mathematicians in here. You like math? So when we talk about this, what is the difference between pure math and applied math? Pure math focuses on the boring stuff. You know, when you go to an algebra class, they make you learn theorems and proofs, Pythagoras theorem and the quadratic equation, all these things, just formulas and things. Remember, that's just the way math is set up. But math by itself is useless unless you can apply it to something. If I'm going to build up these stairs, I have to know how far to make the rise and the pitch, and you have to have math. But it doesn't do you good if you don't know what the step is for. And so today, in this message, we're going to be concentrating on more the applied part of the message instead of the nuts and the bolts. We don't want it to be fact-based. We get that all the time, and we know all these facts. And so we know the formulas for evangelism, but today we want to be able to apply and show real-life examples of what God can do for us in the world of evangelism, and how He can specifically work through us in fulfilling His plan. Now you see here this third generation. I'm a third generation Adventist. My grandfather came into the church. His mother received, this is back in the late 30s, early 40s, she received a flyer in the mail. And it talked about an evangelistic series that's going to be happening. She didn't want to go, but she gave it to my grandfather. My grandfather, he was a religious man, but he was a smoker and a drinker. He went to the meetings. When the meetings were over, the Lord took away all that from him just like that. And he became an Adventist. So I grew up learning Adventism all of my life. I knew all the historic fundamental beliefs, all the things that Adventists know. I was taught, Ellen White said this, Ellen White said that. I was taught some things that Ellen White said that she really didn't say. Or they could take her words and apply them to something so I wouldn't do something I wasn't supposed to. And so I grew up in the church. I went to academy. I went to Highland Academy. That was in just north of Nashville, Tennessee. And briefly thereafter, I went to a place called Southern Missionary College. Now, that ought to give you an idea of how old I am. Because went from Southern Missionary College to Southern College to Southern University to Southern Adventist University. So there's been a lot of iterations in that time. So I went to Southern Missionary College, SMC. They used to call it Southern Matrimonial College because everybody would go there to get married. And so, you would think with that kind of upbringing and all these things that I was subjected to or I was educated about, you think, this guy has all the right things laid out, so he should go straight into the ministry and be ready for translation. Well, I was taught all the rules, these things that you can and can't do. And so when I got a little older and I was able to make my own decisions, I turned a different direction. When Satan had that opportunity to jump in and show me what the world had to offer, all those things that I had seen on, various places, I jumped on it. I would say took advantage of it, but I I embraced it. And so for the next 20 years or so, I lived a life that is not something that you want to see your family or children subjected to. It was a wrong path. I got into some unsavory things. I got involved with things I shouldn't have. I was, drinking and doing certain things. Two things I wouldn't do though. I would not eat pork, and I wouldn't work on the Sabbath. Now everything else, was free game. But those two things I wouldn't I wouldn't budge on. No matter of fact, there's a guy one time we were sitting there drinking, and he was having some pork, and he got mad at me because I wouldn't eat pork. He was ready to fight me because I wouldn't eat pork. And he said, "But it's so good." I said, "Well, if this dog running across the yard tastes good, would you go eat it?" He said, "Well, no." I said, "Well, that's how I feel about pig. It's just something I don't want to eat." But it was one of those things. And so, if you're a parent and you got small children, they may go astray at some time in their life. But never forget that in Proverbs, we're told, train up a child in a way that he should go, and when he's old, what? He will not depart from it. Now, many people take this as a promise. This is not a guaranteed 100% promise. You train somebody right, and they're going to stay right. I'm a living example of that right there. And so, because there's this other element that's involved with your children, it's called free will. God will not take away the free will. It's still there. But this, although it's not a promise, it's a prescription for success. You follow this pattern, and your child has a much better hope of later on in life, if they do stray, of coming back into the fold. So, let me ask you, this is kind of off of that subject, but have you ever had an event in your life that happened that was so impactful in your life that drastically altered your life? I'm sure we've all had events in our life that have done something that were like that. These mile markers, these forks in the road, so to speak, these things where we make a decision that impacts our life forever. So just think in your mind for a moment, just think back, say, try to recall different areas in your life where you can say, wow, this was a marker that changed my life. We have those all along the way. Well, I had one of those. It was February 24th of 1999. And this was one of the real first major events in my life that had a profound effect on my life. And I mentioned earlier, my life at that time was everywhere except for where it should have been. I was all over the place. And I was married at that time to a woman whose life was spiraling out of control. She was totally out of control. And it was bad. I mean, I won't go into all the sordid details, but let's put it this way, it was really bad. And I look back on that time now as kind of my preparation for the time of trouble. Sometimes we have events in life that are so traumatic and so bad that you think, wow, if the time of trouble is worse than this, it's really going to be bad. And so I kind of look at that as God's preparing me for the time, or allowing this to help me prepare. And so it got so bad that she eventually ended up taking her own life. She overdosed herself intentionally. But as bad as it was those previous months, she had fallen so far. It's a sad thing to look back and think about now. She destroyed every relationship that she had. She had a young child that I adopted that adored her and just totally turned him against her. It was really a bad thing. But yet, it's still a jolt when you see that person who's caused so much heartache laying there in a hospital bed on machinery, on ventilator, being kept alive by artificial means. And the only thing was left to do was for me to have to make that decision on whether to turn off the respirator and donate her organs to help somebody else, and which eventually happened. And praise the Lord, there was 3 people that were able to receive donations that were able to live healthy lives as a result of that decision. But again, it's tough. When you got in the medical field, you see these things all the time where you have to make life and death decisions, and it's hard. But Satan, he works hard to destroy us. But God works even harder to save us. works hard to save us. He worked so hard that he gave his only begotten Son that we may be with him in the kingdom one day. But during all that turmoil, I didn't realize that God he was always there. He was able to get my attention. I mean, if anything, that kind of thing can get your attention. And it literally all stopped with that event, that one day. And I stopped all the crazy. I stopped all the drinking, the partying, all those things. I wasn't doing much at that time. I'd slowed down drastically. But I still, in one day, just everything. People say, I can't quit doing this thing, or I'm going to try to quit, whatever it is. If you say I'm going to try, you've already defeated yourself. It's more up here. It's more in your mind than it is your physical body. I mean, you have to say, I am going to quit. Through God's power, you can do it. And so when I made that decision, there was no question of what I was going to do. So, I turned to God, and because he was all I had left. However, even after all of that, it took me 12 years to really turn my life around. And so this is where we begin this message on this evolution of an evangelist. We're talking about an evolution of evangelism, but to have an evolution of evangelism, you have to have an evangelist that has evolved from somewhere. So it was sometime around the year 2012 that my current wife and I decided that we needed to do something to revive our spiritual life. Well, let me correct that. She made a decision that there's something that we needed to do. She made a decision because she was wanting a change. But at that time, I was kind of happy where I was. So she was deciding for us. But we were going to church. We were doing the things that Adventists should do. We were saying our prayers. We were doing various things. We weren't doing things we weren't supposed to. But we were, nominal Adventists. But she wanted more. She was ready to move. My wife, I forgot to mention, my wife is Jamaican. And so, if you know Jamaicans, they can be pretty, when they want something, they can make it known. And Shan is no different. She's a very mild-mannered, humble woman, but when she wants something, she can make it known. And we both have a stubborn streak, and so, it kind of can make some interesting dynamics sometimes. But see, at this time, I had a problem going on. I was addicted. I was addicted to television. I was a first and second commandment breaker. I had the idol of television. That was my crack right there. I was addicted to it. By the way, if you see that little thing up there, the rest of the world may follow the rules, but I must follow my heart. That comes from a Disney movie. Don't do that. The heart is wicked above all things. If you trust your heart, you're trusting a fool. Trust God. And I advise, I don't think it's any problem here, but, I recommend staying away from Disney and Hollywood as much as possible. But at that time, I was into TV. And Shannon and I, that was our time together. We'd watch certain shows. That was just time we had together. And that's what we do. And so she began to ask me, and she wanted to straighten up her life. She said, Tony, do you mind if we turn the TV off and, maybe, study the Sabbath school lesson? And being the good husband I was, I said, sure, Shan, as soon as the show's over. There's one problem with that. Well, more than one problem, but DVR came out at that time, and the show never ends. You can sit there for hours on end, and go like that, and then, pull out your Bible and say, okay, there you go, Lord, I hope that was good for you. One of my instructors at Southern, Dr. Bauer, called that the fan method of reading. You put your book in front of a fan and it blows it, and that's how he got through reading 600 pages in one of his classes. He taught me that, so now when he comes to read, when I'm in his class, he said, did you read your book? I said, yeah, I used the fan method, so he can't say anything. And so, but she started to become more insistent about the change. And she became more insistent. More insistent. Fellas, what word do we use for that? Begins with N and ends with agging. I felt she was nagging me to death. It was driving me crazy. And finally, she got the point. She knew she was beating a dead horse. She knew that she got to the point where she wasn't getting anywhere. So she said, God, I have done everything I know to do to change him. But to no avail. Here's her words. She told me, she prayed, Lord, I want a better life, but Tony will not change. And she said, what else can I do? And God told her, change yourself. What? He's the one with the problem, not me. I'm the one that's wanting to change here. I'm trying to do the right thing, and he won't do it. And he reminded her that she needed to be concerned with herself. In Jamaica, they have a saying, every tub has to sit on its own bottom. You're responsible for yourself. He told her, I will take care of him. That's not your job. You just set the example. And so she did that. So the next night, we kind of had our nightly routine of watching television. We were going to sit down and watch, I hate to say Comedy Central, Adult Swim. I hope nobody here knows what that is, but if you do, you know what I'm talking about. They're not the best programs, They've gotten even worse. I don't know what's on there now, but they weren't good then. But when it came time to sit down and spend our husband and wife time, watching TV, she said, honey, I really don't want to watch television tonight. I'm going to go study my Sabbath school lesson. But, if you want to sit here and watch it, it's fine. I won't be upset. But I'm going to go study my Sabbath school lesson. How do you think I felt? I was mad. What do you mean you're not going to watch it? How dare you spend time with God instead of me? But deep inside, I knew she was right. I knew it. That's why I got mad. Because I should have been the one as the priest of the home saying these things. Ladies, and I'll be talking to you some today. If you have and this, I guess this can go for the men too, but if you're in a relationship and your spouse is not doing what they're supposed to do, don't beat them over the head. Let your example be your club. It's a much more effective weapon. Much more effective weapon. And so to make a long story short, God reached me that night. I went and apologized to my wife. I said, you're right. I should be doing this. And so that's when a change started being effective. That's another one of those forks in the road happened right there where, I could have either gone this way or this way, and I chose, fortunately, the right way. And so during this time, by the way, in this series, you're going to see me kind of going back and forth between a couple of scenarios. You're going to say, what's this got to do with this? Two back and forth. It's kind of like when you go to the book of Revelation. You go to Revelation chapter 13, and you can read about these beasts. You go to Revelation 14, and you can see these three angels. You see it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense until you get the bigger picture of how this all goes together. So this story, these messages that I present today will be kind of like that. So, and we will understand how God directs in our life. If we can see how he directs in our world events, we can see how he directs in our life as well. So during this time, I was employed in the technology department of the local school system there in North Carolina. And I love the work. I guess I'm kind of like Joseph, kind of a tech geek. We enjoy technology, and I love the work, and it was a lot of fun. I always said, in the school system, the work wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the teachers and the students. I could work on my machines, and everything was good. But I was there for a number of years, and so as time went by, I knew that when opportunities for advancement came, I would be the one that'd be number one for the job. I was number one on the eligible candidates. I didn't see it as being prideful. I didn't see it as pride, although I look back now it was. I saw it as them picking the most capable person who could do the job. And be honest, I was. But that's just being honest, not being boastful. But when jobs opened up, invariably, I would get passed over. Every time. I knew some of the jobs I was even overqualified for. But for some reason, someone else would get them. I trained a guy, and the guy, even after I trained him, he was not that good. And so another job came, he got it. He applied for it as a joke. I thought, what in the world is going on? And so the job that I loved so much was becoming less and less enjoyable. Have you ever had something in your life you really enjoyed and something comes along and just takes the joy out of it? I mean, just takes the wind right out of your sails. I don't like this anymore. In my case, it was these multiple doors closing. God in His mercy was closing doors, which I didn't realize at the time. You know, God, when He wants us to do something, He has this way of closing doors and opening other doors. And sometimes you feel like you're it's like cattle being run through a gate. It's like there's only one way to go. At the time, I didn't see that. All I saw was I was just being taken advantage of and not getting what I thought was just. I didn't get my just reward for what I was doing. But that and some other things. I'll get back to something shortly. But in the word we read, now the word of the Lord came unto Jonah. And I put my name in there because the word of the Lord came to Tony saying, arise and go. So the first step on the journey back to Christ was to begin to go to the prayer meeting. I failed to mention something earlier when I was talking about the TV. See, TV takes up so much room in your life that you know anything. So when you give up something that's bad, you've got this void here. And if you don't fill it with something positive, Satan will come back and fill it back up. You know the story of the person that cleaned up their house had a demon in it. They cleaned it up, and the demon left, and he came back and saw us nobody was living in it. He brought all of his friends. Well, if we don't find something positive to put in our lives, when we have a void, Satan will come fill it up. And so we decided to go to the prayer meeting. But Shan said, well, since you're not watching TV anymore, why don't we go ahead and just cut off our cable television? No, I can't do that. It's kind of like the smoker who wants to quit smoking. What do they always do? They hide a pack just in case. I'm not going to do it, but just in case. Well, the TV, my just in case was, just in case a good documentary comes on or Amazing Facts has a new series. I had that just in case, happen. But again, folks, as you probably guessed, Shan won again. We got rid of it. We ended up saving a lot of money. I wasted a lot of time in front of that television, so it worked out pretty well. And so, since I had no TV, prayer meeting was a good Wednesday night choice to fill the void. And so, we went off. And by the way, if you're not going to prayer meeting, I don't know or what you're doing, but I highly recommend prayer meeting. Ellen White in Steps to Christ tells us, those who are really seeking for communion with God will be seen in the prayer meeting. Faithfully to do their duty and earnest and anxious to reap all the benefits they can gain. They will improve, and see, I like to personalize this. We will improve every time of placing ourselves where we can receive the light from heaven. Anytime the church is open, we should find ourselves there. It doesn't have to be for always meetings. It can be for fellowship. We should be spending time together, getting to know each other. I was telling a friend right here last night, the Baptist church got that down. We go, we have Baptists come to our meetings. They accept the message. They love the meetings, and they're on fire. They come in, and they walk in the doors, and nobody says a word to them, and they don't know anybody, and they turn back around, and they walk back into the arms of the people they know and love. If we have that same mentality of loving people as Christ loved, we will see that revolving door stop and more people staying in our church. And there's great truth in this statement right here, because if I hadn't been attending these services I would have missed out on another major important fork in my life. See, as we began attending the midweek service, somewhere down the line, this gentleman right here began attending. Very nice gentleman, but he's one of those people that was very knowledgeable. And when questions was asked, before anybody else could answer, he was always answering. You know, and as good as it was, after a while you think, man, let somebody else have a chance. And so it got a little annoying. The guy's name is Keith, by the way. And now Keith, he was not there. I was living in North Carolina at the time on the campus of Mount Pisgah Academy. And Keith was there because he had developed a terminal type of cancer. His daughter was the girls' dean there, so he was there living with her, you know, to try to get treatment and things for his illness. So in reality, he had no choice if he was going to go to prayer meeting but to go there where we were. So, you know, that was just something that, looking back, I don't know what I was thinking, you know. It's just, I had some issues going on still at that time as well. And so with his illness, he'd become a little more unsteady, so he had to use a cane to walk. And to get to the girls' dorm for the church, there was a big flight of concrete stairs. They went up a good distance. They call them Jacob's Ladder. And, you know, even if you're in good shape, that's a rough thing. And so even if you're healthy, it's difficult. And so one night after prayer meeting, I think it was getting towards fall. It was getting cold, and we asked Keith if he needed a ride up to the dorm, and he said, "Yeah, I really appreciate that." So we took him up there, and when we got there to the house, to the dean's apartment, he invited us in, and he wanted to show us his library. He had a great library. I mean, every conservative, good Adventist author you could think of, he had. I would love to have that library. It was amazing, and so we got to talking, and Keith, he had a lot of things he wanted to share. He made a Bible study guide that you can, you know, a Bible marking guide where you can put things in your Bible. So he gave me a stack to give to people. He was always giving me copious amounts of newspaper articles or books. He was always giving me things to read. Unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say I never read any of it. I'm so thankful that he never asked me if I liked the things he gave me to read. You know, as a Christian, I would hate to lie to him and tell him yes. But once again, during this time, something happened that changed my life forever. This was a major, major, major fork in the road. Keith gave me a lot of stuff to read. And one day I got a call that Keith had been put in the hospital, and shortly thereafter he passed away. I didn't get to talk to him. Matter of fact, his daughter just sent me this picture a couple of days ago. This is the first time I've seen what he looks like since before he passed away. It's kind of, you know, that's kind of gets you when you see somebody that you had a problem with, that you really knew, you grew to know and love. You know, just a very, very good man. And it hit me hard when he died. But one day as I was coming home in my house, I was walking to my bedroom, and I looked on the wall, and I found this very book right here. This book right here, A Fork in the Road by Herbert Douglas. And I remember I was thinking, well, I better take this back to Becky because, you know, that's something she might want. And I said, but you know, he gave me all this stuff to read. The least I could do is read one thing that he gave me to read. And so I started reading the book, and I couldn't put it down. And it changed my life, this book. Now, this book is not a theological masterpiece. It's basically a story of the history of some things that happened in our church back in the 1950s. And growing up as an Adventist, I grew up as a historic Adventist. There's certain things that we taught and believed, but as I went through some of our institutions, they were teaching some things that had been changed since that time. But I never changed my belief. Even though I was out of the church, I still knew what I believed. And so I read this book, I thought it confirmed things in my life that I knew were right, but I thought that I was just stupid because I wasn't in the church and didn't know better. And so it sent me on a new journey, and I started really getting involved in church. But meanwhile, back at the school at this time, things were still going, but they weren't improving. Things were not getting better. Promotions going by, flying right past me. I had a supervisor that, for whatever reason, I don't know what it was, but we just didn't see eye to eye. She was the kind of supervisor that nitpicks over nothing. Makes stuff up that's not true. It's just not a good thing. And so that, coupled with a couple of things happening in her department, made me seriously begin to wonder if I needed a change. I didn't understand at the time while these things were happening. All I could see was this tunnel vision of bad things happening. There was no logic, no rhyme or reason to it, but it kept happening. And I got to the point where I just wanted to quit. I was fed up. I loved the work, but I couldn't stand the environment that was there. But there's one thing about if you quit your job, now what? Then what? This is where my training is. So I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so I kept studying. I kept reading. I kept reading in the Fork in the Road. And then in that book, he kept referencing back to this book, The Word Was Made Flesh by Ralph Larson. This tremendous book, And I was reading it. It helped us to better understand Christ and His nature and how we apply Ellen White, the different kinds of propensities, evil propensities, all these things. It gave me a better understanding of different things about Christ's nature. And so things began opening up in my mind. I began to see things more clearly. I began to understand our church and the history, the teachings, the things I learned younger. I learned history, dates, and it was sticking. It was just I enjoyed it. And so my wife began to notice this. And so she saw the changes, and she said, Tony, have you ever considered ministry? Nope. I don't want. I've never preached. I don't want to preach. I don't like being in front of people. No. I'll just keep taking the abuse where I'm at. Now, let me take a moment here to pause for a second, because if you've ever been out of the church for a while, if you're new in the church, it's easy to become on fire, and the fire becomes blazing. Sometimes you can go overboard. You become hardcore, and when you can get sucked into extremism, or you get caught up in certain discussions, that lead to attacking the pastor or others who don't believe the same present truth that you do. Our motto was, they're not like-minded. We want to be around people who think like we do. We don't want to be around the people that were teaching false doctrine or false truth. If you were one project in those days, you were one step from hell. I'm going to go off track here, but one day I was at Pisgah, and Alex Bryan, the guy that one of the top people in the one project, he was there at a graduation, sitting right behind me. His father was my son's pediatrician. And I thought, wow, the demon himself is right here behind me. But for some reason, I turned around and started talking to him. And it made me realize he was a person that Christ died for just like me. He was nice. He was humble. We had a good conversation. And I apologized to him for the thoughts I had about him. Not that I agree with what he was teaching, but what I was doing was a lot worse than what he was doing. We went overboard for a while, but God is good at taking the file and taking off the rough edges, kind of bringing us back away to a better place. So now I found that if I find my way where I'm kind of making The liberals and the conservatives are a little bit upset. I'm probably in a good place. Because if everybody's patting you on the back, then there's another group that's probably ready to punch you in the head. And we found out about this one day. We were at a friend's house, one of our like-minded friends. And my wife and I have been reading The Great Controversy, and we were noticing how much love was interspersed throughout The Great Controversy. And so we were over there talking, and we were saying, how much love we found in The Great Controversy. All of a sudden, face turned red. She said, love in The Great Controversy. Where do you see love in The Great Controversy? Love, love, love. I'm sick of hearing about love, love, love. Again, we were having issues with the groups that Jesus only and only love, all these things were no doctrine, only love. And so we were in a place where we were sick of hearing that. I understood where she's coming from. But when she said that about The Great Controversy, Shannon and I, we were shocked. We didn't know, exactly what to say, so we didn't say anything. So we left a short time after, and we were walking out. We kind of looked at each other and said, "Is that what we sound like? Here we got present truth, and we sound like demons? Have any of us, in the name of Christ, said something in a way that doesn't reflect Christ?" This is the perfect way. The strongest argument in favor of the gospel is a loving and lovable Christian. You can love people, but you also got to be lovable. If people don't like you, they're not going to listen to a word you have to say. So one Sunday afternoon, my wife and I were out shopping and ran into a pastor friend of mine named Mark Swearingen. He was a pastor in the area. And Mark, we saw him at a Ross department store of all places. And we were talking about some of the things we just talked about. And Mark turned to me and he just said, "Tony, have you ever preached before?" No, I haven't. I never have. "Well, would you like to?" "I've got a small church, be a good place to start." Also, the big knot came right here. Because I already told you I didn't want to preach. And I was thinking, oh man, how can I get out of this? What am I going to say? Then the light bulb went off. Let me pray about it. Now, how can you argue with that? He knew what I was doing. He knew I didn't want to do it. He let it go. But it got me out of it. But as we were leaving the store, I remember my wife walking up, poked me in the back. "See, I told you need to preach." And that's when, that little seed was being planted, that maybe somewhere down the road that might be something. And so we fast forward a couple years. We're approaching May of 2014. It was coming the end of the school year there where I was working. June was coming up, and that was the busiest time. The students go home, and so we had to inventory every piece of anything that was technology. And it was a big job. Everybody hated it, but that was the biggest thing you had to do during the year. And at the same time, my son was there on the campus. He was 11 years old, almost 11 years old at the time, and he was doing a violin camp there. And he's a new violinist, and he was loving it. Matthew, he's been a piano player since he's 5 years old. He loves music. And at the end of this particular program, a lady came up, and she ran up and gave my wife a card program. It's called about At First Sight. And it's going to be happening at Southern Adventist University in the near future. And said, "We don't think about letting Matthew go." And of course, when he heard about it, "Yeah, let's go." There's one problem. It happened in June. And what did I just say happens in June? Inventory. I can't go. I can't go. So this was that first night. By the way, this is Matthew. He's been going that every year since then. Except this year because he was in Europe, so he couldn't go. But so he went there 9 years in a row. And so this is from their website. And so, oops, got the wrong thing here. And so, as we were there, wife was asking me to take Matthew. And again, we had inventory coming up. And so, again, the thing that worked not good, my supervisor was a bear to work with. We didn't get along. She just wouldn't ever work with me. And, you know, it was getting worse and worse. And so my wife this time said, Tony, we need to take Matthew to this program. I said, no way. I can't get off. It's not going to happen. It's our busy time. And my boss certainly isn't going to let me off. You know, ask your boss. No, ask your boss. No, ask your boss. I said, no, she will never let me off. Exasperated, she said, Tony, ask your boss. Fine, fine, fine. I know what she's going to say. So I sent her an email, asked her for the time off. A few minutes later, I got a reply back. You have the vacation time, take it. That was me. Yeah. Did I send that email to the right person? Did I send it to the you see the resemblance? I said, did I send it to the right person? Did she really give me the time off? But you know the worst part about it? I had to let my wife know that she was right. Let me tell you, crow does not taste good when you have to eat it. Again, gentlemen, a word of advice. If your wife asks you to do something within reason, you'll be well served to listen to them. They're usually smarter and more intuitive than we are. And if you do what they ask, it'll save you a world of eating unclean crow. You know, you can take it or leave it, but let me tell you, coming from the mouth of a donkey, I'm just saying, you know, take it or leave it. So simultaneously at this time, the Holy Spirit had been working on me in my heart. He been asking me to think about ministry. So, you know, I was getting frustrated with the work, and so I went ahead and sent my application into Southern. You know, I thought, well, maybe somewhere down the road, I don't know. But I sent it in. They asked for a little deposit, and I sent it in, and so I was thinking, you know, a year or two down the road, you know, might go. And I just turned 52 years old, so it's not a great time in your life to be changing careers. You know, not many people do that. There wasn't a lot of people encouraging me at that time, you know, to do even when I talked to a ministerial secretary at the local conference, he was anything but encouraging about that. And so while at the schools during the summer, they said they're going to rearrange our teams. We had teams of 3, which had one team lead. The team lead, one of those positions, I got skipped over 4 or 5 times. And so they asked us if they're going to change teams. You know, tell us which district you'd like to work and who you'd like to work with, and we will do our best to get you with that team. And so I did, and I failed to mention, there had been previously one team I worked with, there was a guy that was a team lead that was not the best. So I didn't want to work with him again, so I made it clear, you know, anybody but William. You know, I didn't care, but I made it clear I wanted to go. And so during this time, they asked us, and so I was assured where I was going to be, and then I got the email, they had the teams, and guess who I had as my team lead? William, who I said I wouldn't work with again. That's it. That's it. As my Jamaican friend would say, me done, me done, me done. And I was done with that job. So I called my wife. I said, Shan, told her what happened. I said, Shan, I'm going to quit my job. Her first question, what are you going to do, preach? After thinking for a second, I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Man, you would have thought that the 4th of July hit. She was happy and jumping, fireworks going off, you know, the little things were flying, everything. She was happy. She was happier than I was. She always wanted to be married to a minister. That was a lot of women don't want to be married to a minister, but that was her desire. She wanted to be married to a minister. But then she followed with a question. She said, "Well, Tony, you never preached." I said, "Well, that's true, but neither did Moses." She said, "Well, aren't you too old to preach?" And I said, "Well, Moses was 80. That's good enough for me." And so I walked back inside the building. So I'd gone outside to talk on the phone to Shan, and I walked back inside to the team members I liked real well, and I told her, I said, "Well," I said, "I'm done. I'm going to quit." First question she asked me, "What are you going to do, preach?" I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am." She said, "It's probably a good thing." She said, "I think you'd be good at it." She was, not Adventist or anything. But I could see how God was all of a sudden now was, see my doors were closing because he had a different direction for my life. And so later on I found out, I was talking to a friend of mine who worked in the central office where they did all the promotions and everything. He wasn't in charge of it. He knew what's going on. And I was talking to him about why I was always getting passed over. And he told me, he said, "Tony, it wasn't because you were not qualified. It's because you wouldn't work on Sabbath." And he told him, he said, "That's not legal." And they said, "Well, who's going to know?" And so even then, God was using those things behind the scenes where they were doing that to put another direction in my life. And so Satan was working feverishly to try to discourage me and send me on into a different direction because he knew he could see where God was leading in my life. Anybody think Satan isn't smart and can't see what's going on? Really don't understand what's going on in the spiritual realm, the spiritual warfare we're going through. Satan knows very well that God is working for us. He can see when we're doing things, even if they're incremental, in changing our lives. Romans 8:28, my favorite verses. We know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. So here we are, June 2014. Me still working at the school. My wife, she's a teacher. She was a trained teacher in Jamaica, but she was working as a part-time secretary, homeschooling our son at that time. We're heading down to Collegeville, Tennessee for the At-Site music program. And so we arrive on the campus of Southern. This is what you see when you get to the roundabout right there in front of Southern. Beautiful campus. We got there, dropped Matthew off for his music camp, and said, "Well, while we're here, we might as well spy out the land. Just kind of feel it out and see where God is leading in this whole thing." And so, remember, I still hadn't quit my job. I still had my job. I still had obligations, so I couldn't just drop everything and come down there. But, I was looking down the road what I was going to do. So here's where you can start seeing where God is really starting to show his direction. We stopped there at the school, so we went in there and said, where's the first place we're going to come here that we need to go? Financial aid. Working for the county school system, an hourly worker, living paycheck to paycheck. It didn't lead itself to saving a lot of money, especially the kind of money you would need to attend a place like Southern Adventist University. $20 plus thousand back then a year. So with financial aid, told them our predicament, and they crunched a few numbers. And they said, "Yeah, here you go. You're all good to go. Your money's taken care of." So they had grants with government, all kinds of things that they worked out through the school. And said, "Well, okay. Well, if we ever come here, we're going to need to have a place to live. Again, we don't have a lot of money to come down here, so they sent us down to the student housing. We got down there and talked to Cindy in student housing and told her, and she looked. She said, "Well," she said, "there's one family unit that's still available. It's yours if you want it." "Yeah, well, first of all, we weren't even planning on coming there." I said, "Second, I already got a deposit." She said, "That's okay. The money, when you send your application in, it'll transfer over to your deposit." So she said, I thought to myself, "This is kind of weird. I'm not even coming here, and I got my school paid for and a place to live." So they sent us down to just to look, at what kind of schedule we would need, for school. And so I got down there to, it was during the summer, so it wasn't really staff. There was a student advisor, and they were going through some of the classes. And he said, well, you'll need X class, this class. I said, no, I've had all these classes. I had a degree from AB Tech in Asheville. I had other transfer credits from Western Kentucky University, Southern when I was there. I had a lot of credits. And he said, well, it's not showing up here because I sent my transcripts into Southern. He said, well, it's not showing up here. He said, go down to records and see what's going on. So we went down there to records and told them the story, and the lady went and looked. She said, oh, yeah, your transcripts are here. We got a stack about this deep, and yours is at the bottom. But since you're here, we'll take yours and put it at the top. We'll evaluate yours today. Within the hour, I had 75 transfer credits. I was coming in with senior status. Already. Didn't have to take any more gen ed classes. All I did was theology classes if I came. And so I remember my wife and I, there's some big long, Joseph, you remember those steps, the ones over by Wright Hall that are kind of long, they got a little one kind of very clunky to walk down, going towards the girls' dorm. We were walking, in 2 steps to 1 down. And I remember looking over at Shan, and I asked her, I said, are we coming here this year? And she said, yeah, it looks like it. You see, when you allow God in your life and allow Him to guide your life, He doesn't mess around. I mean, back when I was living back there, I was a deacon there at the church, and I remember saying, God, I need something else to do. Because I knew I was wanting to be an elder. That's where my pride kicked in. I thought, by the way, nominating committee, if somebody ever says, I want a position, you're well served not to give it to them. Because God does the appointing. We don't do self-appointing to our own positions. I didn't need that position anymore than I needed a hole in the head. But I said, God, I need something to do. I didn't know He was looking down the road that I'd be here today. He thinks a lot bigger than we do. He doesn't mess around. He gets things done. But He does it in His time and His way, not the way that we tell Him He ought to do it. And I'm very thankful He doesn't listen to me. You ought to be thankful He doesn't listen to me too. But it doesn't end there. It's a lot more to this evolution of this evangelist. And when we come back to the divine service, we're going to pick back up and we're going to transition from an unwilling evangelist to a non-motivated or unmotivated evangelist. And I'm going to share with you how God can lead a hard-headed, unwilling person into His service of evangelism.